You just discovered what it takes to become a legend. Grab your eye. Let's mobilize.
How's it going, everyone? It's Handleless TML back at it again with a brand new Cyberpunk 2077 video. First and foremost, I want to apologize to my longtime viewers. I know you guys have been waiting for the promised Cyberpunk videos, and it's taken me longer than expected to produce them. Going forward, you can expect more consistent Cyberpunk 2077 content. With that being said, let's take a deep dive into the character, Johhny Silverhand. To better understand the man who would eventually become Johhny Silverhand, I think it's best to describe the state of the world around him during the time of his birth, and give a brief history of Night City itself. The sources I will be pulling from are Cyberpunk 2077, The World of Cyberpunk 2077, Cyberpunk 2020, and the Firestorm Shockwave sourcebook, all of which provide canon information on the character. Born on November 16, 1998 in College Station, Texas, Johhny Silverhand is actually older than Night City itself, being born about 5 years before the start of its construction in 1993. Though Johhny was born about 1,500 miles away from what would eventually become Night City, the events surrounding its creation would go on to shape him for the rest of his life. Johhny was born about 8 years before an event in the United States known as the Collapse took place in 1996. A series of wars would kick off all across the world. Johhny's story starts during the second conflict in South America around 2003, where he would join the military at a young age, being sent into action quickly. Not much is known of Johhny's time in the military beside it being around the time that he and many other soldiers were cybernetically enhanced for combat. It is also during this time that one of Johhny's comrades would sacrifice themselves to save his life. This event, along with realizing the war was being fought at the behest of a corrupt and manipulative government, caused Johhny and a number of other soldiers to stop fighting and desert the military. Feeling the pressure of having lost the loyalty of so many soldiers, the government used its influence to create a powerful propaganda campaign to make the American public detest deserters of war. It is around this time that Johhny would take on the last name Silverhand as a nod to his newly acquired cybernetic arm and as a reminder of his time in war. Rather than returning home, Johhny would put his past behind him and travel to a fairly new city called Night City, located in the northwestern California. Fueled by his change in perspective, Johhny aimed to expose government corruption and started a band called Samurai with his friend and fellow musician, Carrie Uridine. It wouldn't be long before Samurai expanded and went from performing their first gig in the Red Dirt Bar to being discovered by producer Jack Masters, who would go on to sign the band to Universal Recording, one of the largest labels of the time. This deal gave Johhny just the platform he needed to get his message across. Samurai rose to the top of charts in record time, and before the band knew it, they were all famous by their early 20s. A large part of this was due to the revolutionary nature of Johhny's lyrics, which would evoke a spirit of rebellion within its listeners. Johhny and Samurai reached a point where they, or more specifically he, could sway crowds with just the sound of his voice. Despite this success, Samurai would have its troubles with the various members having to leave for personal reasons, and the band would eventually split up in 2008. Now, Johhny and Carrie were still two of the most popular musicians of the time, and Johhny planned to use this fame to start a solo career in order to continue pushing his anti-government and anti-corporation message to the masses. Being so popular, another record label known as DBS Music approached Johhny about a deal, threatening to blackmail him for deserting the military, something that wasn't known to the public. Rather than caving into the blackmail, Johhny would go on to once again sign with Universal Music and release an album called Sins of Your Brothers, in which he not only admitted that he was a deserter, but revealed all the atrocities the government had ordered the soldiers to do. The album would go on to widely change the public opinion on deserters and help catapult Johhny's career to even greater heights. Still going strong well into the 2010s, Johhny continues his rebellious campaign by doing shows such as the free benefit concert in Japantown, which was held to bring attention to the police brutality during the homeless riots. Johhny had also become involved with a young solo by the name of Rogue. She hated the corrupt government and corporations almost as much as Johhny did, and it was the basis of their relationship. Despite this, Johhny would eventually be caught cheating around 2011 and their relationship would end. As seen in the Never Fade Away sections of both Cyberpunk 2020 and Cyberpunk 2077, Johhny would continue spreading his message with his music, and it would eventually land him in a relationship with a netrunner by the name of Galt Cunningham. Much like most of Johhny's relationships, his relationship with Alt was bumpy to say the least, and Johhny, while knowing she was a netrunner, never knew the full nature of Alt's work. One night in 2013, just after performing a concert and shooting a bullet into the crowd, both Carrie Eurodyne and Alt Cunningham would get into a dispute with Johhny over his growing obsession with becoming a solo act and spreading his anti-corpo rhetoric to the point of extremism. Alt, having had enough of Johhny's antics, calls him out, essentially telling him it's time to grow up and leave his rocker boy lifestyle behind. This conversation would continue outside of the Hammer nightclub, where Johhny would be approached by hired gang members disguised as fans. Upon turning down a request for an encore, Johhny and Alt were suddenly ambushed by more thugs, with one of them being able to incapacitate Johhny using mantis blades from the back, leaving him unable to defend Alt as she's stuffed into a van and taken away. Now, the Cyberpunk 2020 sourcebook tells a slightly different variation of Johhny's flashbacks in 2077. While the overall story is the same, there are some slight variations in Never Fade Away specifically that I feel are worth pointing out, that largely pertain to Johhny. Many of you may remember this line from Alt Cunningham in 2077.
Jesus, Alt, I dove in after you. Gonna tell me now this ain't your problem?
It is not. The Alt Cunningham you strove to save in Arasaka Tower no longer exists. This should be obvious to you, as you were responsible for her death.
Your death wasn't Johhny's fault.
How could you know?
Seen you in his memories. It was an accident.
What you saw was his subjective view of what happened. A warped account of events he locked away in his subconscious and replayed time and again. It bears no resemblance to the truth.
If you're not Alt, who are you?
I use her engrammatic data.
Really?
Here she explains that the flashbacks we play through as Johhny are actually warped versions of what really happened. In my opinion, it would explain why the events of the TRPG are slightly different from the events of the game. This is further confirmed by series creator Mike Pondsmith himself, who confirmed several plot points I will cover in just a moment. But most importantly, he states that he and CDPR agree that Johhny Silverhand is an unreliable narrator at best. With that in mind, I'll try my best to make the distinctions clear. So after the ambush and kidnapping of Alt, Johhny's unconscious body is taken to a Ripper doc. In the TRPG, this Ripper doc is unnamed, but described as having a thick German accent. In the video games, however, the Ripper doc is given a name, Milt Naumann. Both interpretations of the character have known Johhny for years and consider him to be a son. However, the sourcebook goes on to explain that the Ripper doc's son was actually Johhny's best friend who was killed in the intercorporate war years ago. While Milt Naumann in the video game does care for Johhny, the version of him in the sourcebook seems more endearing of Silverhand and his well-being, and as the text states, no man should lose more than one son in a lifetime. Also, rather than having a German accent, Naumann's voice actor is none other than Mike Pondsmith himself, so in a way, Johhny really is his son. In both games, Johhny expresses his gratitude for being helped and is introduced to the man that saved him, Thompson. It's not explained as thoroughly in the game, but Thompson explains to Johhny that he had already been tailing out because he heard a security company by the name of Arasaka was looking for netrunners to build a program called Soul Killer, and Thompson had a grudge against Arasaka for the death of his wife. Thompson himself working for the World News Service. As for what Soul Killer is, simply put, it's a cyber defense program belonging to the security company Arasaka that not only kills its netrunner targets, but it makes a digitized copy, or engram, of their personality, image, and voice and stores them into a private database known as Mikoshi, which is only accessible by Arasaka elites such as Hanako. Arasaka can then use the engram to accomplish a variety of feats, such as speak and interrogate the dead. This sinister use of technology would go on to be one of the bases for what would eventually be known as the Relic, but we'll get to that later. Thompson goes on to explain to Johhny that Arasaka wasn't actually after him, he just, quote, happened to be home, and in the source book, Johhny is immediately accepting of this, but in the video game, Johhny seems more convinced that Arasaka took Alt just to get at him. In both versions, Johhny and Thompson agreed to infiltrate Arasaka to save Alt immediately, but not after Johhny gathers some backup. The pair immediately head to the nightclub Atlantis, where Johhny requests for the assistance of Rogue, who was a solo at the time, and her partner Santiago Aldecado, who was a nomad and leader of the Aldecado clan. Little did Johhny know he was being tailed by Arasaka, and upon striking a deal with Rogue, they attempt to assassinate Johhny by storming the Atlantis nightclub with over a dozen Arasaka assassins. With Thompson waiting in Johhny's Porsche downstairs, the trio make it out of the Atlantis using force and regroup in a distant alley. Johhny then hatches the plan of hosting a free concert in front of Arasaka's Night City Tower to draw in the huge crowd and start a riot as a diversion. Johhny calls his old bandmate Nancy to help get the word out, and the plan works like a charm. Johhny is able to provoke a riot, which gives him, Thompson, Rogue, and Santiago the cover they need to slip inside of Arasaka Tower and save Alt. The events of the source book and flashbacks are largely the same here, as the four make their way through what little security Arasaka has left inside, and the office where Alt is being held by a man named Toshiro, who was leading Arasaka's regional office at the time and arranged for Alt's kidnapping. In their way stood Toshiro's bodyguard, Akira, who in the source books is also known as the Supergoon from Hell. Now, according to the flashbacks, Akira is defeated by Johhny before the crew makes their way to Toshiro and Alt, where Johhny immediately shoots and kills Toshiro and unplugs Alt from the net. But in the source book, the conflict is more drawn out, as Akira and Toshiro try desperately to erase all evidence of what they've just done, or rather what they've just forced Alt to do, create Soul Killer. Erasing evidence meant erasing the body as well. Toshiro is able to activate Soul Killer, killing Alt before being incapacitated by Johhny. However, since Alt created Soul Killer and was one of the best net runners in Night City, she was able to escape into the net. In both versions, Johhny is not immediately aware of this and arrives too late to save Alt's body. Another difference between the source book and video game is that Johhny actually doesn't assault Thompson for filming Alt's body. The source books describe Johhny as seeming more dead inside during the moment he thought Alt was gone. Thompson recorded Toshiro, called him out for his actions, and sent the recordings to the world news. He then stops rolling the cameras on his own, as opposed to continuing to roll like he does in the video game. In both the game and source books, shortly after these events, Johhny would go off for a period of time with Santiago, living amongst the nomads. It is unknown what Johhny accomplished during his time with the Aldecado clan, and he largely wouldn't be heard of again until the year 2023. A decade later, Thompson, who still had a bone to pick with Arasaka, discovered a huge uncontaminated database that was considered to be close to all-powerful in the wake of the net's recent destruction at the hand of a man named Rake Bartmus. The database was located inside of Arasaka's Night City Tower. Thompson, with the help of Militech, a US Army general named Patrick Eddington, and famous solo Morgan Blackhand, arranges an assault on the database with plans of blowing it up using a suitcase bomb provided by Militech, who was actually at war with Arasaka at the time. The bomb itself was powerful enough to level a small section of a city. Johhny decided to tag along because his netrunner friend Spider Murphy then discovers that Arasaka had Alt trapped after 10 years of hunting her in the net, and were using her yet again to create an upgraded version of Soul Killer called 3.0, a program so devastating that even Alt herself wanted it destroyed. Accompanying Johhny and Spider Murphy are Rogue, a full cyborg with a grudge against Arasaka named Shaitan, and Thompson himself. Little did the crew know, Morgan Blackhand and Patrick Eddington, who did their own parts during the bombing, were actually using Johhny and his crew as a diversion so they could accomplish their own goals. In fact, destroying Soul Killer wasn't even a priority, as Morgan felt Soul Killer would always come back in some form, a sentiment shared by Johhny. It's actually unknown who would eventually set off the bomb, revealed by Mike Pondsmith himself. So, technically, Johhny isn't the one who blew up the building, but he did take part in the attack. While the method of entering the tower is left up to the players in the TRPG, the video game shows it's being infiltrated by Johhny's team from the roof. Also absent from the TRPG is a manifesto that Johhny had supposedly written, explaining that he was attacking the tower to, quote, topple a monument to corporate colonialism. Upon making their way through waves of security, Spider and Johhny are finally able to hack their way into Arasaka servers, where Spider communicates with Alt and frees her from her prison by transferring her into the hidden part of the net. Once again, the game and the source books differ at this point, as Johhny is shown taking care of most of this by himself in the game, whereas the entire team accompanied him through the offices of Arasaka Tower in the TRPG. Adam Smasher, a near fully cybernetic human from Arasaka Security, ambushes Johhny in the game, whereas he ambushes the entire crew in the TRPG. In the game, Johhny and Spider make it to the roof, and just before Johhny can escape, Atom Smasher catches up and incapacitates him before sending him off to be interrogated. Johhny would be carried away via Arasaka medical personnel to an undisclosed location. It is implied the location is offshore, as one can see Arasaka Tower being blown up in the horizon. Johhny is first interrogated by Arasaka henchmen, who fail to get information out of Johhny despite physically torturing him. Moments later, Saburo Arasaka, CEO of Arasaka, also known as the Emperor of the Arasaka family, joins in the interrogation. As it would turn out, despite Alt being free, Soul Killer was not destroyed, and Saburo would go on to use it on Johnny's Silverhand, ending the Rocker Boy's life and turning him, or rather his personality, into an Engram. In the TRPG, it's heavily implied that Johnny's life would come to an end on that day, but it would instead be at the hands of Atom Smasher, who Johhny was absolutely no match for. Johhny would sacrifice himself to give the rest of his crew a chance to escape. While the diversion did help, Smasher would quite literally blast through Johnny's Silverhand and go on to battle Shaitan as the rest of the crew escapes. I would like to again point out that Johnny's account of these events is unreliable at best during the events of 2077, so much of what happened in the TRPGs can still be true. It's even stated in Cyberpunk Red that Cyber Murphy went back to use Soul Killer on Johhny herself, but if that were true, it begs to question how Arasaka came into possession of Johnny's Engram, though it is entirely possible that he was captured by Arasaka in the net, much like they captured Alt. Regardless, I think it's best to assume the interrogation scene with Johhny is true enough, as it would explain how Arasaka would have his Engram to place in the relic decades later. Moving on to 2077, or rather sometime before it, nothing is known about how Arasaka used Johnny's Engram before placing it in a device called Relic. Relic is a biochip that can have a person's Engram uploaded onto it. Whoever is in possession of the Engram will be able to have limited communication with the Engram. Arasaka advertises it as a way of speaking to the dead, and in a way, they aren't wrong about that. However, Saburo Arasaka, who is well beyond 100 years old by this time, has requested a special version of the Relic be made specifically for his use. While the commercial version of Relic allowed for communication, Saburo's special version of Relic would allow for the implanted Engram to take over a suitable body, effectively granting a person a form of immortality. To clarify, an Engram is simply a copy of a person's personality, and to become one is to die. In other words, Engrams can be seen more as a complex form of artificial intelligence. As such, it does have its limitations. Johnny's Engram having scrambled memories as a result of the rad damage to his body in the process of recording his Engram, as explained by Mike Pondsmith. Another example of this can be seen with Jackie Wells' Engram. Being that Arasaka created Jackie's Engram from his lifeless body, it came out horribly corrupt, unlike Saburo's, and only capable of a few select phrases, and hopefully future DLC will expand upon this or interviews. If anything comes up, I will certainly update, but let's move on to the events of 2077. The events of the game are largely determined by the player, and will likely be expanded upon when DLC is released, but the story of Johnny's Engram is quite short in 2077, but I will cover the major plot points and some of the endings loosely. At some point prior to 2077, Johnny's Engram is placed into the prototype Relic. The relic was stolen from Saburo Arasaka by his son Yorinobu Arasaka, who held a grudge against his father. Yorinobu made plans to sell the Engram, but the Netrunner gang known as the Voodoo Boys learned of the Engram's location and worked together with a doll by the name of Evelyn Parker, who had close relations to Yorinobu, to arrange for the relic to be stolen. The Voodoo Boys also learned the location of the now fabled rogue AI version of Alt Cunningham, and plan to use Johnny's Engram to communicate with her and ultimately capture her for their own use. Through a series of unfortunate events, the plan would go up in flames when the merc hired by Evelyn Parker to steal the relic was forced to place the Engram in their own cyberdeck. The mercenary's name was V, and the relic would be sealed within V upon taking a gunshot wound to the head. Due to the relic's design, Johhny's engram would begin revealing itself to V and even communicating with or taking control of V at various points through the events of 2077. This was due to the relic slowly making changes to V's body so that it would be suitable for Johhny to take over. In other words, V was slowly being pushed into the back seat of their own body to make way for Johhny's engram. And once the process was complete, V would cease to exist. While Johhny is initially reluctant to help and even tries killing V using their own body, he is eventually able to work together with V to accomplish a variety of tasks. Throughout the events of 2077, V relives altered versions of Johhny's past, and how close V and Johhny become is largely determined by the player. The consistent parts of V and Johhny's story are that at some point, Johhny reconnects with Rogue using V's body, where she helps them on at least one mission to locate Atom Smasher, which fails. Due to the actions of the Voodoo Boys, Johhny is able to reconnect with Alt in the net, but at this point, Alt is a far different entity from who she was in the physical world. Regardless, she agrees to help Johhny and V attack Arasaka and attempt to separate the two in order to save V. This is largely due to her owing Johhny for saving her from Arasaka, and for V agreeing to give her access to Arasaka's subnet. Another consistent part of the story is that V and Johhny eventually have a one-on-one about Johnny's feelings of not being memorialized after his death, and Johhny opens up to V about how he never felt he had many friends. Many real friends, that is. Over the rest of the game, Johhny and V eventually meet with Hanako Arasaka, daughter of Saburo Arasaka. And depending on V's choice, Johhny will either help V infiltrate Arasaka, or sit out while V defends it. All decisions come with their own endings, where Johhny either goes off into cyberspace with Alt to an unknown fate, or another ending to Johhny's Silverhand story is him and V agreeing that V's fate is sealed, and their body will only continue living if Johhny takes control for good. In this ending, Johhny takes over V's body, who is in their early 20s, and is happy to live on, but will always be haunted by what happened to V. And with that, the story of Johhny Silverhand has come to an end. Johhny Silverhand, in my opinion, is one of the most compelling characters in the series. To me, he's the epitome of what a world like what we see in Cyberpunk 2077 can do to the everyday human. While he did have radical beliefs that would push his actions to the extreme, and while he was, for all intents and purposes, an a-hole, he certainly wanted better for the world around him. And when met with unstoppable forces, he did the best he could to leave his mark and go out in a blaze of glory. If you made it this far into the video, I seriously want to thank you, and again to my regular viewers, I apologize, Choombas, and you can expect more Cyberpunk content coming your way, especially when the much needed DLC is released. Also, don't worry, I haven't forgotten my character model series, and I will be finishing those in time. I still have miscellaneous NPCs to go through and a few other groups. But that's all for now, and I thank you all for watching. Be sure to leave a like and comment on the video if you'd like me to create more content like this. And with that being said, thanks again, and see you all next time.